Welcome. This is the last of 3 narrated slide decks produced by Outfitters 4 that provide an introduction to basic elements of not-for-profit board structure and function. If you missed the first 2, you might want to click the links and view them before you proceed with this one. After a brief introduction to the third sector and a few of the legal issues particular to it, in this set of slides we're ready to begin talking about the central governance core of the not-for-profit corporation, the Board of Directors. Boards are made up of people, volunteers who have chosen to serve their communities. Traditionally, there have been 2 categories that have been the primary source of board members. The first has been experts, for example, lawyers and accountants, whose professional knowledge can be beneficial to the organization. The second category is people with money or people with access to money. Not-for-profits must raise funds from private donors, so people in this category have been essential for not-for-profit boards. Over the last several decades, a number of factors have come together to make the traditional approach to board membership somewhat more difficult. First is the proliferation of not-for-profits in this country. As an example, in the period from 1994 to 2004, the number of 501c3s increased by over 60%. Even in the abstract, this is an impressive statistic. But when you stop to consider that each of those not-for-profit corporations requires a board of directors, after you do a little math, you realize that very quickly there are not enough lawyers, accountants, and people with access to money to fill all those boards. In addition, while this may be saying the same thing in a different way, all of those not-for-profit corporations also need funding. So more and more organizations are competing for a pool of contributions that is not growing at nearly the rate that the number of not-for-profits is. Over the last several generations, there has been a change in the social environment that has had a profound effect upon board recruitment. Individuals and families are far busier than they were in the 1960s, and this has had a real impact on all kinds of volunteer service. This is especially true of board membership. The simple truth is that being a good board member takes time. And while it has been long in coming, not-for-profit corporations are finally beginning to understand the importance of representing the diversity of their constituents and of their communities on their boards. Better decisions are made when a broader range of views are represented. However, this breadth of experience is often not found in the traditional sources for board members. This has come to require new approaches to recruitment. These changes have put severe pressure on traditional board structures. As a result, around the country, not-for-profits are experimenting with new models. One of the central premises of these models is that not every person assisting an organization through committee work need be a full member of the board of directors. It is far simpler to get someone to agree to serve for a limited period of time in a limited capacity than it is to get them to make the major commitment of service on a board of directors or trustees for a period of 2 to 3 years. States have very lenient requirements as to the minimum size of a board of directors. In most states, it's as low as 2 or 3. This means that a small core group of directors can organize and supervise the work of a much larger number of volunteers serving on committees to assist the not-for-profit. This arrangement has an additional advantage of allowing the volunteer and the organization to check each other out. I sometimes refer to this as not-for-profit dating. The organization can see how good a worker the person is, and the volunteer can make a determination about how important the mission and the programs of the organization are to them. And so, out of this experience, it's possible to find new board members. The 3 models shown on the slide are just 3 examples of many from around the country that are being attempted to address the issues that we've raised to this point. The likelihood is that as we look over the next 20 to 30 years, there will be no one model that will serve for all not-for-profits. Rather, individual not-for-profits will find the approach that works best for them. The pressures around board membership have also led to new procedures around board operations. Increasingly, we are seeing written job descriptions for board members. In addition, we are seeing more and more boards adopting evaluation processes both for the board as a whole and for individual board members. I will have more to say about this when we get to slide 14. With that background on board membership and structure, I'd like to talk a bit about the collective responsibilities of a board of directors. The first of these is, of course, legal. And that is that the board is responsible for ensuring compliance with all of the laws and regulations on the local, state, and federal level, and where it's applicable, making sure that the organization is adhering to accrediting agency standards. This latter applies primarily to institutions of higher education and hospitals, but there are other areas where accrediting standards come into play as well. The next area of board responsibility is policy and governance. It is the fundamental role of the board of directors to develop and approve the mission of the organization, as well as to ensure that the organization is fulfilling that mission. The board is also responsible for developing the plans through which the mission will be carried out, and, of course, it is the board's role to create and approve the policies that govern the operation of the organization. A third area of board responsibility is fiduciary, seeking and treating the resources of the organization with as much care as the individual members do their own. Fiduciary is another word I include simply because it's fun to say. But seriously, this is an important aspect of board governance. The financial well-being of the not-for-profit corporation is the responsibility of the board of directors. The board must review and approve the budget as well as monitor it over the course of the year to make sure that there are no surprises. In addition, the board must play the principal role in fundraising. Over the last decade, I have modified my views somewhat on what I am about to say, but let me give you the unmodified version and then explain the nuance that I now add. One of the questions I am asked most frequently is, does every member of the board have to make a financial contribution to the work of the organization? Actually, there is only one correct answer to that, and that is yes, and let me explain. If you are approaching people outside the organization to make contributions, either grant makers or individual donors, if they ask, does every member of the board contribute? And the answer is no, they are inevitably going to say, well, why should I give? This does not say anything about how much individual board members should give. Rather, it is about 100% participation in giving. And, of course, some boards place upon themselves requirements of either giving or getting a certain amount of money, and others add to that give, get, and do as a way of investing in the organization. But at heart, the principle is that every member of a board of directors of a not-for-profit corporation should directly and personally contribute to the financial health of that organization. There's the unmodified version, and I believe the principle is sound. However, as boards have come to see the great merit in creating a more diverse board and including representatives of clients served by the organization, there is a power imbalance that can make strict adherence to the principle coercive, counterproductive, and unhealthy. I leave it to individual boards to sort this through for themselves. Another area of board responsibility has to do with people. With respect to paid staff, the board's only concern is with the chief executive officer, usually referred to as the executive director. Its responsibility is to hire and evaluate the chief executive officer, whose job it is, in turn, to hire and evaluate any other staff that the not-for-profit might employ. It is important for the organization to maintain clarity about these lines of authority. The board is, in effect, the boss of the chief executive officer, although it should remember that he or she is an expert in the service area of the organization and defer to their greater knowledge and understanding insofar as possible. Beyond that, the chief executive officer is the supervisor of all other paid staff positions in the organization. It is fairly easy to understand that difficulties can arise if individual board members, or the board as a whole, begins to assume a supervisory role over staff who report to the executive director. Board micromanagement of staff is one of the most common sources of organizational dysfunction. The content of our last two slides is taken, with permission, from an organization called BoardSource. It is a clearinghouse for information about board governance in the United States, and internationally it supports non-governmental organizations and civil society organizations. The 10 points you see in these two slides mirror the things I have been talking about to now, perhaps in a more concise way. I also present it to you because you will run across it again. It is a list commonly presented to illustrate what boards do. Please read this slide and the following one at your own pace. I'd like to highlight Responsibility 7. Almost all boards are self-perpetuating. That is, they bear responsibility for identifying, recruiting, training, and evaluating themselves. Given how central the board is to the health of the not-for-profit, it can be argued that this role is in many ways the most critical one that a board serves. It is also one of the roles that is least understood and, in the case of evaluation, one of the least performed. It is easy to understand why people have a tendency to avoid evaluating themselves and their peers. However, this is one element of board responsibility that cannot be shirked, and there are ways to make it less onerous than it might immediately appear. However, the specifics of these options are beyond the scope of this introduction. This brings us to the end of our introduction to boards of directors. In some senses, it's astonishing that a system has developed whereby the essential governance of one of society's most important sectors is overseen by people who are volunteering their time. Boards of directors can, should, and do play a vital role in maintaining the health of our society. And so, service on a board should be viewed as both a great honor and a great responsibility.